Okay, good afternoon. My name is Tyson Moeller, General Director for Network Development for Union Pacific. I've been with UP for about 27 years now. Majority of that time was on the commercial side, so work with our customers building business. The last 5 years I've been in this role, and so I work with both at a state and a regional level for any kind of public-private partnerships. So that whether that be working with DOT or any of the passenger agencies, so DART, TexRail, who are present here today, work very closely with them for any kind of extensions. So things like the DART Silver Line project. So what I'll do is I'm gonna run through high level UP, who we are. Then I'm gonna have Katherine kind of talk about her role at the Gulf Coast Rail District and the HART initiative that we've put together in Houston. And then I'll talk about some general projects that I've been working on throughout the state as far as future grade separations and or some of the passenger rail projects. So here's the UP franchise. We're about a close to $22 billion company and operate over about 32,000 miles of railroad. So unique franchise. We think that, oops, I was looking for one more slide there. We interact with all of the border crossings going in and out of Mexico. We also operate in and out of Canada with the exchanges. And then we have a strong international presence as well, bringing in a lot of Asia freight through California there. One of the highlights, since a lot of you are here locally in Texas, kind of highlight what we represent here in the local markets. We spend about close to $2 billion in the Texas market here, and about 5,000 employees here in Texas. And so if you think about our overall, if you saw the previous slide, we're about a 32,000 person company. And so you've got quite a few folks right here in Texas supporting the economy. Here's the slide that I was looking for that really highlights all of the interchanges into and out of Mexico, and then also highlighting the ports that we serve both on the West Coast and the Gulf Coast here. And so if you think about Union Pacific or the freight railroads in general, we're moving what makes the economy go. So think about all the products that are being shipped. Strong in the auto, not only finished autos, but then also auto parts going through here. And so here's kind of a breakdown of our business mix. And so when you think industrial, that would be our industrial chemicals, it could be plastics, more of our boxcar type business. And then the bulk will be grain, coal business. And then the premium would be more of the containerized, and that includes both the international side as well as the domestic. And so I think some of the previous conversations were about, I heard about the longer trains and the infrastructure. So we're about a $22 billion company. We put about $3 billion back into our company, though, every year. And so what I'll highlight here is if you look at the infrastructure, we put about $2 billion just to turn the lights back on from a maintenance standpoint. I'll point out the capacity side is about $600 million. And out of that $600 million, the majority of those dollars right now are being spent in the South because of all of the industrial growth that we're seeing. So if you think about the plastics industry, you've got new steel facilities that have been put here in Texas as well. And so with that, we're not a static organization. We continue, you figure when the railroad was built, you might have sidings that were 7,000 or 8,000 foot. We've talked about some of the longer trains. Now those sidings are as long as 16,000 foot. And so we're putting those longer sidings in key corridors, like from the West Coast, coming in through Texas and up into the upper Midwest. And so that's the UP strategy there. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn it over to Katherine, let her introduce her organization, and then we'll talk about some more specific projects there.
All right, thank you, Tyson. It was my plan just to be here as a participant, and I made the mistake of telling Tyson that I was coming. And he twisted my arm and said, Katherine, you've got to come up there with me. So here I am. But it's great to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I started actually with the city of Houston going on 31 years ago in transportation. I've been with the Rail District for 3 years now. 2019, I became the executive director. Before that time, I, of course, transportation projects more related to traffic control, but had the interesting opportunity to work with quiet zones. And so that was my real introduction to railroads. And so all of the quiet zones that currently exist in Houston were established by me. And so that's kind of my relationship with Tyson and BNSF and the Class 1 railroads when it comes to that piece of it. So the rail district, I'm going to start with, I'm going backwards, is a political subdivision of the state of Texas. It was created to enhance the economic benefits of rail and passenger transport while improving regional quality of life. GCRD works with public and private partners to develop and implement systematic approaches to improving the regional rail network for the benefit of the region's residents and economy. It's our mission and vision include improving safety and security at crossings to include grade separations and the promotion of multimodal mobility. Under GCRD's initiatives, just recently in the 87th legislative session, Senate Bill 1990 allowed us to add to our toolbox to include commuter rail, bus rapid transit, and advanced technologies. Before that time, we were specifically focused on freight rail. The district is governed by a board of directors consisting of 14 appointees and 3 ex officio officers. The district chairman is jointly appointed by Harris County Commissioners Court and the mayor of the city of Houston. Other members include appointments by the chairman of the Port of Houston Authority, City of Houston, Harris County, Fort Bend County, Galveston County, Montgomery County, and Waller County, as well as Harris County Mayors and Council Association and Fort Bend Mayors Council Association. So we have very lively meetings when we come together to discuss all of these issues. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about HART. In an effort to address many of our freight challenges and capitalize on our federal funding opportunities, the Greater Houston region responded by coming together to implement a programmatic approach called Houston Area Rail Transformation, or HART is the acronym. We believe this approach will successfully position our region to realize federal funding opportunities and improve mobility and quality of life as a result. So GCRD, we began our working group discussions in September of 2022. And the board approved this committee in January 17th. However, this concept had been discussed well before that time by many stakeholders in the past, looking at CREATE in Chicago as a framework, if you will, but uniquely tailored to the Houston region. So Tyson Moeller and also Bruce Mann, who serves as the chair of this committee, had this concept and idea, these conversations long before we began in 2022. Now, the HART Committee is a working group that is evolving to include smaller committees, and this slide basically talks about or shows you the committees that currently exist for the rail district, and HART was added to that. We are a working group that's evolving to smaller committees focusing on strategic goals and next steps with the current goal of producing grant-ready applications for our region. Our first collaboration, let me go back, I think I skipped over one. Included gathering to discuss the notice of funding opportunities for the federal grant opportunities. We reached out to ask each of our member entities, will you take advantage of the federal grant opportunities? And this exercise allowed for us to share ideas, review applications, and provide letters of support. And so these are the pending grant applications that we look at as kind of our first iteration or our first collaborative effort. The RCE grant application, CRISI, and also the SMART Grants program. Now, HART is open to other counties and cities within our region, and the unique structure of GCRD allows for non-GCRD members to join the HART committee. So currently, of all of those counties that I named, there are still 3 counties that are adjacent that are not members of the rail district, but they have the opportunity under our makeup to be a part of the HART committee. So this added benefit, we believe, will help the working group to hit the ground running without, it allowed us to hit the ground running without having to create a new organization for this effort. So we're evolving, and it's our plan to have a successful collaborative effort that will act as a springboard for future projects under the HART initiative, ultimately improving mobility and safety and quality of life around our railroad crossings within our region. So thank you so much.
So I've got a few more slides here to kind of run through here. You might say, well, why now for HART, for something like that? Well, I don't think it's been mentioned, but every year now, starting last year, for the next 4 years from now, you've got about $5 billion up for grabs for these public projects, right? Chrissy Grant, which she mentioned there, now went from about $300 million to about $1 billion. The rail crossing elimination was never a grant application, but it's funded with about $300 to $350 million now. So that's really what started bringing or catching people's attention, right, with all of those dollars that are out there, and looking at other regions that are being successful in getting those federal dollars. So that's part of the drive for HART there. So here are some of the projects that we're working on, and I would like to give a special thanks to TxDOT, who has supported all these efforts. They're not only supporting us here in Houston, but in the DFW market as well. But Chad Coburn and Caroline are here, but Chad's been very supportive as far as various studies in order to identify key areas that we should focus in on. And so what these studies do is it allows us to get some design concepts, some cost estimates for what some of these projects are, and then it allows us to have good conversations with the local agencies, whether that be the cities, the counties, or other. And so that's part of the foundation that we have for HART, is that we just completed, it probably took us about 2 years to put the Houston Complex study together, but it took some of our confidential information for the train modeling. It also looked at the various public flows as far as vehicles and everything else. So this helped us identify key areas for future grade separations. There's also certain areas that we can improve some of our capacity projects that would have public benefits as well. And so there's areas in Houston where you might have a single mainline bridge, but on each sides you have double track. And so if we're able to double track that future bridge, that gets better flows for the trains through the Houston complex, and that's less block crossings. And so those are some of the initiatives that we're looking to solve for. These opportunities, these projects don't happen overnight. It takes a lot of planning. And so I think some of the grade separations that Katherine had mentioned there have taken over 13 years to develop, and they were short of funding, and they're not cheap. So these grade separations in Houston, if you do an underpass, these are running $50 to $60 million per grade separation that we're working on for this. So I'll point out, so thank you, TxDOT, for all the support. We're also engaging with the MPOs, who are also have the regional dollars with federal funding, and they're helping with any kind of studies and additional funding for these projects through here. And like Katherine said, we're working closely with the rail district here. So I think you see some of the grade separations here locally. That second bullet point for Prairie Creek, that's right outside of our Mesquite auto and intermodal facility. And so we do a lot of switching activity over there, and so there's opportunities with all the growth over there for future grade separation, which is being designed now and funded by NCT COG. I'm also working closely with both DART on the Silver Line, where we have freight operating rights over there, and working with TexRail as far as their future extension that we help them connect to the airport. We're now looking at helping them connect going down to the medical district. And so that'll be a collaboration between TexRail. There's some TxDOT property right-of-way that's needed, and then they're working closely with Fort Worth Western to get further south through there. I'll show an example, Dayton, Texas Highway, that 90 grade separation. I'll show a picture of what we're trying to solve there. That's been an item that the community's been looking for a solution, and TxDOT's currently designing a grade separation out there, but it's somewhat tight because of the right-of-ways that are out there, and I'll point that out there. So here is a good example. So this is Dayton, Texas, so just east of Houston, and we operate about 10 to 12 trains across Highway 90 here every day. And so the local community has been looking for solutions for future grade separation. So what we'll be looking to do is they'll grade separate. It requires some right-of-way from us that will work with them. But this is an area that both UP and BNSF operate through here. And this is also our Houston sub, which is the main line for where KCS comes through here. It's also an Amtrak route as well that operates every other day. Put this slide, so I think about some of these public-private partnerships, and so I thought TexRail was a good example, that it was really part of a grade separation that went over our Davidson Yard that started some of the conversations with TxDOT and TexRail at the table. And so we did key right-of-way swaps that would be needed for TexRail's future project. Part of what UP's agreed to is that TexRail will operate on what is our Mainline 1 now. It also lays out where TexRail will put in a new Mainline 5 so we can maintain our operating capabilities through there. And so we work closely with those agencies. We'll also be doing some of the corridor ID studies with all the dollars that are out there. And so we'll be taking a close look at Texas for future services through there. And then I wanted to outline some of the larger projects that we're working at a state level. The one here locally, regionally, here in Dallas, is the Canyon Project, which is the widening of I-30. And so that has significant impacts from an operating standpoint on us because we're operating over. TxDOT had put those structures underneath, but they have quite a few challenges there. But that's probably about $1 billion project that we're working closely, and that takes all efforts. So that we're working closely with the city. TxDOT has the COG and everybody at the table working through that for improvements for the public there. And the other large project that was just approved to move forward is the Houston project, the NHHIP, and that's about a $7 billion project that is looking at relocating I-45 from the west side of downtown Houston to the east side. And so they'll stack the highways over 59 and 69, and that should improve the fluidity going to and from Galveston. So that was an overall presentation as far as the certain projects. We'll open it up for questions if you have anything more specific as far as some of the projects and or HART. Looks like we've got a gentleman in the back.
Thanks, Peter. Hi, I'm Tom Compson from Houston, and I hadn't heard of HART, and as I'm sure you guys are very familiar, it's the whole idea of grade separation and block crossings has been in the news. It's been a hot topic at council meetings. So has it been covered in the press? I may have missed it, I don't know. And what other grade separations, do you have more grade separations planned than the two that were listed? Because as with many of my fellow Houstonians, I've had the opportunity to wait for some trains that were stopped at a number of those existing crossings. Thank you.
We started, like I said, in 2022. I guess an official opening, no, not yet. Our first presentation was to the FRA administrator about maybe 3 weeks ago. He came to Houston, and I presented to him about HART and what our initiatives were. The basis for our beginning is the Houston-Beaumont freight study. So we're looking at all of those crossings and how they can be improved. From the rail district standpoint, we represent more than just the city of Houston. So it gives us an opportunity to include all of the counties, whereas they may have one grade crossing, whereas of course, in Houston we have 500 plus, some people say 700. We have a lot of railroad crossings, and a lot of them are close together. And so people feel that, they live that. And so that's something that we felt that this committee coming together could start to address that. And so even from the beginning of the rail district in 2007, when the first meeting, we still deal with some of the same issues from then to now. And so we're hoping that this will provide an opportunity along with the influx of federal dollars that will help us to move forward. I think in the coming weeks, you will probably see something more press release. We're hoping with the application that we put in with the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant will be successful for the commerce navigation. we were just talking about a press release for that, so we're going on faith for that, and hopefully we will be successful. So we'll definitely hear about that. That was one of the projects that HART, I guess if you say we endorsed, and we're currently working on future ones. And so those smaller committees that I discussed will help us to take a deeper dive into those crossings to see how much is needed. You know, funds are reality for smaller communities. You know, it may be an issue that they just need the grade separation. One will make the difference, but they may not have the local match. And so that railroad relocation fund would be an opportunity to help move that along. And for those areas that are ready, then just information about how we can band together to make a more competitive application.
I'll add, so to your specific question too, I think the next grade separation that we're gonna look at in the city of Houston is the Griggs Long McCowa, and that's right where our West Belt meets the Harrisburg and goes into BNSF's McCowa sub there. So that's probably the next one that the city will put in for a grant application.
A standpoint of development, Mr. Moeller, as one of the senior officials within the UP's development department, what opportunities do you see presenting themselves under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or sometimes it's called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act? What do you see as opportunities for UP?
So the opportunities, whenever you go after federal dollars, there has to be a public benefit. So we're not looking for any kind of welfare from our standpoint, right? I showed you that we put about $3 billion back into our organization every year, right? That's an annual number that we put back in. What we're looking for are projects that have public benefits. And so like I had mentioned, in Houston, we have a couple of single mainline bridges that match up to double track that we have there. And so if we have an opportunity, if that bridge is a $200 million project, right, that we don't necessarily need it from a capacity standpoint, but there's an opportunity to work with the city to go after some of the federal money, right? So you can turn a $200 million project maybe into a $100 million, right, with the railroad's cost share. So it wouldn't be something that's really on our current strategy for capacity. That might be 15, 20 years out, but we would work with an agency that might make sense for us to push that capacity type project forward. So those are specific opportunities. Does that answer your question?
As you know, it's an 80-20 mix.
What,
You put up 20 cents on the dollar.
right. What he's saying is there's a 20% match. That's the minimum. What we think is on some of the grant applications, though, we think they're more competitive if you put more of a match into it, and if you have multiple agencies going in with that match as well. So an application looks stronger if you have a city, a county, and railroad or railroads at the table putting in that match.
No, I would agree with your observation about a super match. I mean, that's only going to enhance your opportunities if you go in with more than the minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. And on the Houston, both for Houston and DFW, we're actually going into a third phase of the study to look at potential benefits. And then Houston, we're going into a phase 2, which has identified, I think it's 10 at-grade crossings that we would look for any kind of improvements. May not be actual grade separations, maybe it's technology or other. And then we'll also evaluate some of our rail capacity projects that would have public benefits as well.
Hi. Hi, thanks for your presentation. It was very informative. And my question, I'm kind of new to rail in general and have an interest in passenger rail specifically. So I wanted to ask, when was HART conceptualized? Like, when did it become an idea? What was the demand for it? Like, what kicked it off, and how many years has it been since that idea first, produced fruit?
Well, I know Katherine mentioned Bruce Mann with the port, and this is something that he's seen. He understood how well, and UP and BNSF have worked. It's a CREATE program up in Chicago, and that program's been in there for probably 15 plus years, but they've been very successful in bringing in those federal funds. I think it's $1 billion plus that Chicago's brought into that area, right, for regional improvements on both roadways as well as rail. And so, like I said, with the IIJA Act, it probably went from maybe $1.5 billion, $2 billion to a $5 billion up for grabs every year now. And so that's really what caught everybody's eye, I think, from HART to say, hey, the timing's right. There's a lot of things going on at the same time in the Houston complex, because you have Metro that's looking to expand their rapid bus system, which does require to go over our right-of-way. And so we want to look at what those grade separations would look like, right, for the consistency of that service. So you've got projects like that that are happening, along with just a lot more rail business. And you've got more growth in the Houston complex going into some of these older industrial areas that we need to find some solutions for. And so, you know, UP and BNSF have been at the table doing these studies in the background to really lay the foundation for these future improvements.
Great, yeah.
And also, like I said, September 2022 is when we kind of began our discussions with my board and talking about putting together HART in this concept. But also, you know, from the city side, my city hat, you know, blocked crossings, noise, complaints. We hear from citizens, you know, daily. And so we know that Houston, you know, we are challenged with the number of crossings that we have, and we talk about it all the time. On the city seal, there is a train. And so people who live close to those crossings, we hear from them. And so HART is an opportunity to hopefully address some of that in looking at some short-term technology issues that may help us, or long-term projects that will help to, you know, clear out some of the issues. And it's also an opportunity to educate the communities as well, so they can kind of understand what's happening. You'd be surprised how many times I would get calls from citizens who say, you know, the realtor told me that this was going to be a quiet zone, so I'm going to buy my house here. It's going to happen within the next year. And I was like, really? What? Or they're going to move the track. So I'm going to go on and do this now because they said it's happening. And so a lot of it, you know, is misinformation, not understanding the real impact, you know, of living near crossings and what you endure. So that was some of the personal, I guess, side of it as well.
And I'll just share, if for UP, I think I have a similar city hat, and, you know, talked a lot to the residents, and we're from a border community. And so my question is, where you have freight corridors, how difficult or easy would it be to start including passenger rail? And I talk about it from an international perspective. There's a lot of commuting to and from our sister city in Matamoros from Brownsville. And I think you see a lot of idling at the bridges as people are going into the US or vice versa. And so it's something that I think, where you're talking about there's a need, there's additional funding now, populations are growing, right? And so it's just something out of curiosity, because I think we relocated some rail out of the city, right, to go around the city into our port and up north. And so I think that's great, but when would we be able to go to and from Mexico using passenger rail on the same corridor if possible? So just my last question, and we can talk about it later too, but thank you.
Yep, we can talk about that. Part of what UP's perspective is that we're trying to do our job to move the freight. If I think about those border towns, or even like a San Antonio-Austin corridor through there, is that we're really taking trucks off the road, and that's really the message that we've been doing. And we've asked that the communities look at other alternatives, whether that be rapid bus systems, but we really need to preserve much of that right-of-way and capacity from a freight standpoint, so we can continue to grow that freight, right? So what would happen, because I think like the Houston complex is a good example, that there's probably 100+ trains that run through that Houston complex. And if you think about, each rail car represents 3 to 4 trucks. And so if you think about that, just do the multiplication there, right, of how many more trucks that would actually be on the highways, and what kind of burden that would be from a maintenance standpoint for DOT or the city or others. So that's part of our messaging from a transportation standpoint.
So from the rail district's standpoint, Senate Bill 1990, like I said, allowed us to expand our toolbox. And so when we understood that we would not be able to share right of way, we said, okay, we've got to do something else because our communities, our counties, our population is going up. And they need to be able to get to and from either the internal Houston or the reverse commute out to the outlying areas. And so that allows us to look at other opportunities, whether it's bus rapid transit, advanced technology, so that helps us. So we will begin, with kind of a focus on that, studies, to see how we can and tie that into hopefully become a reality.
Native Houstonian, let me applaud everything that you're doing. And now I'm head of economic development for Giddings, Texas, and Central Texas, and I have ambitions towards an inland port with FTZ status, and I wanted to form a rural rail district. I was thinking about forming a district, and I've discovered that there's like about 16 or 18 different rail districts, but very few of them are really active, and of course yours is probably the most successful and the most active. I was wondering if you could comment on the process of forming a district and why yours is so successful where there are so many that are dormant.
Give all of that credit to my predecessor. When they started in 2007 under concurrent order, it started with Fort Bend County, City of Houston, and Harris County. Then the Port of Houston was the navigation district that was a part of it, and gradually over the years we've added, the counties. The challenges, we face though is funding. We don't have a dedicated source of funding, so we've had to leverage, working with communities, either grants or in kind, trying to get projects pushed along. I think that really the political side of it, if the counties, are in favor of looking at rail issues or transportation issues in general, then that goes to the success of us being able to move things forward. And so I think this year has been, well, these past couple of years have been kind of an uptick. Before that time, not as much. It definitely depends on, I guess, the climate and also the federal dollars have provided a springboard and opportunity for us to move things forward.
Katherine, I have to give you credit, though, because you brought a lot of people together in the Houston complex, right? Yeah. Where agencies weren't working unifiedly. So what Katherine's done, and her board has been very supportive, as far as not only bringing the right agencies together, but also having the railroads at the table and understanding what projects work for us and what doesn't. I think you heard Katherine mention that, hey, in the Houston complex, we've sold much of the right-of-way that we can away, right? And a lot of those, the region chose to turn those into roads. And so that was a choice. And so we've sold all the capacity that we can, but it's excess. Right? If you think about the DFW complex, there were choices that we sold right away back in the 1990s, but that allowed TexRail and now DART doing the Silver Line project through there. And so those were different regional strategies through there. But I think, part of the success, though, that I've seen with Katherine coming on board is making sure that the railroads are at the table and that that they get clear direction from us as far as what works and what doesn't. Whereas some of the rail districts in the past haven't always had the railroads at the table, and they come up with concepts that may not be in line with some of our own strategies.
Yeah, although the Class 1s don't have a vote as a part of the district, they are a part of any project, and they are consulted before we can move forward, because we're working in their right-of-way. So that makes sense, but definitely it's an opportunity to bring everybody to the table, and to talk about where there may be conflicts or opportunities for us to share, like you said, in these applications. A lot of times till you sit down and start talking about, oh, okay, we didn't know you all were thinking about that particular project, or we have this on our plan 5 years from now. Maybe you can push it forward and we can do this together. So those conversations, are being had, and and also the hard ones. I say every time we come together, it's a deliberation, because everybody, it's not a kumbaya moment all the time, but I think that everyone respects each other and they understand the importance of the rail-related issues that we deal with in the Houston-Beaumont region. So.
Any other questions?
One more. You mentioned the I-45 project. At one point, my understanding, this was a few years ago, was that a relocation of the passenger main, where the Amtrak station is currently located, was being considered as part of that project, where they would relocate those tracks up to the tracks that go along Winter Street and through the former Hardy Yards area. Is that still being considered as part of the project?
No, that was looked at. That's our Houston Sub 1 and 2 and/or the passenger main there. So that was a concept that TxDOT did look at to maintain our operations, but we don't think that that's necessary for the I-45 project at this point.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Someone have their hand up?
Right up front here in the white.
But it's not like that doesn't happen, because in Springfield, Illinois, there's a railroad relocation project where the Amtrak station would move off the current UP main to the consolidated main about 10 blocks to the east, with Norfolk Southern and UP and others over there. So it is possible to lose a passenger station to railroad relocation if the funding source that's helping to pay for railroad relocation is passenger rail improvement money, and that was in the mix to put basically the Amtrak station with transit and with others there too, in a location that is blocks away from the current location. The two routes in Springfield, Illinois, Lincoln left from one and came back on the other for his final trip. So we're going to be moving the Amtrak station to where Lincoln returned, I believe, instead of from where he came. So it's possible to have that as an occurrence when relocation occurs. And that's the UP main that passes through Springfield right now, which will be done away with. It's the former Chicago and Alton, the former GM&O, the former ICG, the former Cotton Belt, the former Chicago, Missouri, and Western, I think, and now UP route through the center of Illinois. There'll be a new station constructed.
Yeah, I had another question. I just came from SWARS, and Beth Whitehead, I think, gave a really good presentation on, how UP is trying to be proactive instead of reactive, that safety is very important, but if you can weave some of the solutions to those concerns into economic development initiatives, kind of like some of these things that we're talking about, and that you can weave in green and sustainability at the same time, that it becomes more of a win-win, and you get more coalition building and buy-in, like you were talking about, Katherine. So I just wondered if you might want to elaborate on that a little bit. That sounds like a pretty good plan.
Yeah. So for my opening, I've been with UP 27 years, and so 20 plus of that was on the commercial side. So I'm very tightly aligned with the commercial team as we're looking at, as well as the capacity side. So while I'm looking at these public-private partnerships, I'm also tied into what some of the economic development projects are that we're working on. I get involved in some of our projects, what we call network extensions, where we're looking to add track and connect to future industries. And with that planning, we want to make sure that we're working with the local communities, because if we're going to add track and a new customer is locating, that means they're probably going to increase truck volume in the area. And so do we need to be working with those areas for future grade separations? It may not be needed for the initial startup, but to make sure that we're having those conversations, because it takes 10 plus years many times, right, to develop a concept like this. I figure to just design a grade separation is going to take 2 to 3 years, and then you have to figure out how you get it funded. And like I said, I mean, if it's an overpass, then maybe it's a $20, $30 million project, but it takes a while to get that funding. But absolutely, we're aligned from that perspective.
Hi. I was just going to ask if you could just talk a little bit more about the partnerships that you had with HVAC and NCT COG on the MPO level. If you partnered with them on studies, and what were they, or how did that come about?
So the study, TxDOT's always been really good about doing studies. I think the last time we had done the Houston study was back in like 2007. We worked very closely with HGAC and the COG as well with their various studies. But we have a close alignment with those MPOs. They have a direct line to myself. We've got Richard Zientek here that's here with Public Affairs. We have Eric that's here, Lewis, with our public projects. He's back in the corner there, but Eric's group manages all of the public projects, whether it be a regional or a state-led project through there. But we absolutely have a close alignment, and along with TxDOT in the various districts, right? It's not just at a state level, but for these larger TxDOT type projects, it's important that we're working directly with the districts, because some of these projects are extremely challenging. So I think of the Houston I-45 relocation. That impacts UP in 5 different locations. We've been doing design reviews for the last 3+ years. So there's a lot of resources that are used for that, and the MPOs do have a direct line. A lot of times they will help represent us in front of the cities that may not be maybe as sophisticated with some of these larger projects. And so the MPOs can help facilitate that conversation and help understand what kind of processes we go through for that. Does that answer your question as far as how we're aligned? Okay. Okay.
All right, I guess we've run out of questions and we're getting closer to happy hour. But
There we go.
Katherine and Tyson, I want to commend both of you for this partnership that you're now involved in. And if Chicago can have their CREATE project, which has done great things so far, then Houston can certainly have HART. Thank you.